Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Marasek, and I am presenting Coercion and its Fallout, chapters 4 and 5. Let's get started. Does punishment work? So, first chapter. Why do we punish? We punish to control others, simply stated. And if it's not that, then what else could it be? Could it be revenge? Are we trying to, um, get back at somebody? Is that why we use punishment? I would argue that even revenge is its own form of changing a behavior. Um, so what is in it for us? When we want people to change their behavior through punishment, we can accomplish this in a few ways. We can introduce an aversive stimulus, like a shock, bright lights, or a loud noise. We can remove positive reinforcers, like taking away toys, take away a person's freedoms, or apply negative reinforcers, such as spanking or scolding. Nobody likes to be punished, but yet we condone it in our social construct anyway. When we think of the idea of justice, we're not usually thinking about the reward for positive behavior, but we usually are thinking about the punishment for bad behavior. So that Lady Justice there with her scale, it's not actually balanced. It's more about tipping one way or the other. I watch a lot of true crime at home, and invariably when you get to the end, they're always talking about the getting justice for whatever crime was committed, getting justice for Karen because she was murdered. They're never talking about rehabilitating the criminal or trying to find positive ways. They want retribution, really. But is punishment an effective way to get rid of behavior? That is just not a simple answer to the question. There's just too many factors that take place in human behavior to really draw these types of correlations. So correlation does not prove causation. You cannot say that one thing directly influences another behavior. I see this a lot in gun rights. People talk about gun rights. If there are no guns in this area, then there'll be no shootings. Or if we have lots of guns in this area, then the criminals won't commit crimes because they're afraid of being shot. And you just can't make these definitive statements. So how do we study punishment? We need to be predictable and regular with the behavior. Typically, food is used as a positive reinforcer, and shock is used as a punisher. Shocks are commonly used because they can be controlled in terms of their intensity, of their timing to the behavior, how long you want them to be. So they become much more ethical way of applying a punishment because they can be so closely monitored and controlled. So we set up the experiment where a rat presses a lever and he gets food and all is right with his world and he is happy. But then when we change the rules and the food now comes with a shock, what we'll find, not surprising, is that the rat stops pressing the lever. But this only works for a short time. If we were to stop the experiment there, Sidman says, then we would think that it was a success. But if we just continue on, we'd realize that if this was the rat's only source of food, they would go back to getting the food. They just deal with the shock. So we can say that when there is a conflict between hunger or a conflict between a positive reinforcer and a negative reinforcer, like hunger and a shock, eventually that punishment is no longer effective. You're just going to deal with it. And this can be compared to people who've been incarcerated for illegal activities, and this is the only way that they know to get their needs met. Well, after they're done being punished, it's not going to be a deterrent anymore. They're just going to go back to doing what they know how to do. Just going to deal with it. So punishment can lose its effectiveness when it's in competition with positive reinforcement, unless it's really intense. But when it's not in competition, the mild punishment can be effective at eliminating unwanted behavior. So if we changed how the rat were to get food, so if he pulls a lever, he gets a shock, but if he pulls a chain, he just gets it with no shock, well then he's going to stop doing the one behavior and he'll just go with the other. So in that sense, it was effective. Sometimes unwanted behavior is too strong to change to a new behavior, And in these instances, mild punishment can be an effective means of buying some time. You use the punishment, stop the behavior immediately. It gives you a little bit of time to try and introduce or replace a behavior or a new behavior. Another way that punishment can be rendered ineffective is if we draw associations of the pain and suffering from the punishment to positive reinforcement, and this can be seen in cases of like SIBs, self-injurious behaviors. I've seen this with some of my own students, where they have learned that by hitting themselves, they can get the kind of attention that they were looking for. And so the attention that they seek is worth more to them than the pain that they feel by hitting themselves. Parents can also use punishment and then feel guilty for using that punishment, and as a result, they give some sort of positive reinforcement or the attention. And then what the child has learned is, even if I do something bad, I get the kind of attention that I want to get, so it's worth it to get the punishment if I also get the reinforcement I'm looking for. So I leave this chapter with you on this question: how do you think that we, as future proponents of behavior analysis, can make an impact on changing, quote, society's nearly universal orientation towards coercive control? And I will write that in the post as well. On becoming a shock. I thought this cartoon was really funny. I'll let you read it to yourself. All right, here we go. Punishment has side effects. Non-coercive methods as alternatives to punishment are not as well known, and they can take longer to implement. So as a consequence, people use punishments because they don't know what the alternatives are. But as we find out, these alternatives are necessary because the side effects, there are side effects of punishment. So one of the examples that was given was from Hammurabi's code, which I found out there's actually like 282 rules to this code. But the example was that a physician would suffer the same fate as the patient. So if the physician did something and the patient lost its eye, well, then the physician would lose its eye. So as a consequence, the physician's only going to do what they know is what that outcome is going to be. They know that for certain, if I do this, this is going to work, because they themselves don't want that kind of retribution put on them. So the side effects of punishment may be have a greater impact on one's behavior than the original behavior that the punishment was intending to stop to begin with. So we generally would expect people would stop doing behavior that produces an aversive consequence, and we can refer to these as natural punishers, or I've heard natural consequences. There are some events in the environment that become punishers, but are generally benign. Conditions, we call these conditioned punishers, like the word no, or like getting a bad grade on a test. The example of the word no, it's just, sounds that comes from someone's mouth. That's all it really is. However, I certainly know that there are a number of times I will not make a phone call to someone or ask something because I'm afraid of the word no. Same thing with a letter grade. A letter on a piece of paper inherently has no value. Circumstances where the punishing contingency is temporarily removed, such as grandparents spoiling their children, or using bad words when you know you're not getting in trouble because the principal is not around the corner, or speeding when the police or the speed camera are not there. I'm definitely guilty of that. We then learn to act accordingly to the environment and based on the likelihood of either reinforcement or punishment. So we can make a neutral event into a reinforcer, such as receiving a paycheck. That's a neutral event because money is a human construct. It's really pieces of paper and little bits of metal, or it's just a number on a computer screen. But the reinforcer is really what can be done with that money. What can I spend it on? In other ways, like reactions in a conversation or to a performance that gives you good feelings. I used to be a musician, so I know all too well the power of applause for something that you just played. And what if the punishment is the act of taking away a positive reinforcer instead of presenting a negative one? It's just, schools moving away from corporal punishment like spanking and moving into expulsion. But I thought it interesting that he said, if you're going to remove a student from coerced learning environment where they're coerced into learning to begin with, it's probably not going to be very effective. Isolate criminals instead of doing physical harm to them, or most of us would not want to lose our jobs for doing a certain particular behavior, so that the threat of that becomes its own punishment. So the first side effect of punishment is the threat of the punishment. That is being a punishment. So it's kind of like if I have an adopted dog, I don't know where they came from, and I happen to roll up a magazine and they suddenly cower. Like the threat of that being a punishment was enough for punishment for that dog. And this is how new reinforcers and punishers are created. And we learn to fly under the radar to avoid those punishments. And it creates environments that can be reinforcing or punishing depending on who that person is. So if it's a student that gets good grades in school, school is very reinforcing. If it's a student that gets bad grades in school and they get punished all the time, school is very aversive, which makes the whole thing a coercive environment, and then that environment is aversive. So if we take this quote, which I love so much, taking shock as a prototypical punisher, so say shock is like, that is the perfect way to punish because we can control it, we can say that situations in which we receive shocks become shocks themselves, capable of generating all the reactions that shocks generate. And the threat of punishment becomes the punishment. You yourself, as a punisher, could become the punishment. You can condition others that you are a punishment, in which case they avoid you. And then anyone who uses shock becomes a shock, which is where the title comes from. So I leave you with this. Have you ever become a shock to someone else? Or has someone ever become a shock to you? I look forward to reading your discussions, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.